Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. You are one lucky person today, because you are listening to episode 112 of the weekly podcast called Hooked on Wooden Boats. I'm your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If you can't do it, well, 3 or 4 scientists might attempt it and possibly be successful. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the world. Thanks for listening today, folks. Great to have you on board. This is a podcast about getting in the wooden boat game. If you're not in or you're partially in, you need to get fully submersed. One way you can do that is to go build a wooden boat or rent a wooden boat. That's 2 ways, isn't it? Or buy Wooden Boat magazine, or just go touch a wooden boat, or get a book about wooden boats. Do something with wooden boats, folks. It's a lot of fun. Today's featured segment is an interview with Chuck Leinweber. Chuck is the owner. Chuck and his wife Sandra own Duckworks Boatbuilding Supply and Duckworks magazine. Chuck's got a great story today where we talk about his personal history with boating and also about what his company does and what they offer, which is a lot of really cool stuff. So stick around for that interview. I think you're going to enjoy it. Back to my earlier topic of getting in the wooden boat game. If you're considering building a wooden boat, but you're not really sure where to start or how to do the proper planning for what you build and all that, check out my ebook. It's called A Guide for Building Your First Boat, and it walks you through the pre-planning process for getting your ducks in a row, so to speak, before you go build a boat. If you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/ebook1, that'll take you to the information page, and you can make a purchase there for $4.99 if you feel so inclined. Also, I do have an affiliate program available for my book. If you have a website that promotes boating type things and you would like to put the ebook on your website, let me know. Shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com, and I will send you more information about the affiliate program. On November 20th, which is about 9 days away from when I do this recording, I'll be giving a presentation in Port Townsend, Washington at the Northwest Maritime Center from noon to 1:30. If you can make it, I'd love to see you. It's called Building Your First Wooden Boat, a Primer, and I'll basically be hitting the highlights of my ebook about building your first boat and how to plan properly for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I really enjoy teaching it. It's great to encourage people to get in the wooden boat game and have some fun with it and build something with their hands. Pretty exciting stuff, and I built a lot of cool props and things. And I'm going to have a little pop quiz at the beginning, bringing some common household items and asking folks, okay, how do you use this for boat building? Things like a can of tuna, an iron, a clothes iron, a teapot, some dental floss, things like that. It's going to be fun. So please show up if you can, introduce yourself, and say hi. I would really appreciate it. This week we have 2 new subscribers to the monthly newsletter, Graham Woodson and Charles Roberts. Welcome to the subscriber list, guys. Good to have you on board. If you haven't yet subscribed, I would encourage you to do so. You get my free monthly newsletter, where I send out resources, tips, and tricks and give you updates on what's happening at Hooked on Wooden Boats, which is usually more exciting than you can imagine. So if you want to be on the edge of your chair every month waiting for that monthly newsletter, go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. Give me your first and last name and your email address, and you will be on board, and you can unsubscribe at any point. Okay, so it's winter here in the Northwest, and I don't have any boat building projects going right now, so I'm feeling a little bit like a fish out of water, so to speak. Kind of weird. I don't like it. I'm ready to start another boat, but I can't quite yet. It's not the right time. I'd like to get my scamp sold, which, by the way, if you have an interest in buying a scamp, you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/scamp for sale. Get information there. Although I have been working on a wooden bench, as I mentioned before, I may change my moniker to Wooden Bench Dan. I'm making my first rustic bench out of recycled Douglas fir from the kitchen cabinets of a home that was built in the 1960s and then remodeled. And I saved this Doug fir, which is quarter sawn. And the thing is, these cabinets have been painted, so you couldn't tell they were Doug fir till we started tearing them apart. And when we did, the guys there were going to pitch them, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is good stuff. So I saved these pieces. They're about 11.5 inches wide and anywhere from 2 to 3 feet in length. Got like 6 or 7 pieces, de-nailed them. And so I wanted to get some of the paint or most of the paint off. And so I bought this stripper stuff that you put on there. And so I'd put it on there and then scrape, and that would take like half of it off. Then I'm thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I got out my propane torch and my putty knife, and I started heating the paint and scraping it off that way, and that worked really good. Although it could have put out a pretty nasty smoke. But anyway, I got them all stripped down and started building my first bench, which I'm going to put in a little consignment shop just for fun to maybe bring in a couple bucks in the winter while we're watching the raindrops fall here. So that's my only exciting woodworking stuff that's going on right now. What I really need to do is pull in my dory, which I finished building in '97. I've been using it since then. I've never repainted or revarnished it, and it really is in bad need of that. I can't say that's my favorite thing to do is refinishing a boat, but it needs to be done. And the boat looks so pretty when it's all spruced up. And it's a fun boat. I mean, I've used it a ton over the years, so maybe I will do that one of these days. If you have ideas for interviews of folks or topics that you would like to hear on Hooked on Wooden Boats, shoot me an email, would you please? I'd love to get your ideas. Dan at hookedonwoodenboats.com. Now that I'm set up to do phone interviews basically anywhere in the world using Skype, the sky is the limit, so to speak. So shoot me an email if you have an idea. I would love to hear what you're thinking. And I plan on doing some more of these Interview the Expert series on other topics. I recently completed the construction series on 6 different boat building methods. And I'm going to start doing some other ones. I think I'm going to do interview an expert on the use of marine epoxy. And so if you've got some ideas there, also I would love to hear your ideas. Again, Dan at hookedonwoodenboats.com. Okay, we're going to move on to the interview with Chuck Leinweber from Harper, Texas. Let's roll the tape, guys. Take it away, Chuck. Okay, it is November 5th, 2013. I am on the phone with Chuck Leinweber. Chuck, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Happy to be here.
Yep, so Chuck is in Harper, Texas. And Chuck and I met for the first time. Well, we kind of conversed via email a little bit over the last year or so. And then Chuck and his wife, Sandra, drove out west from Texas and attended the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival in September of this year, September 2013. And I got to meet Chuck in person, and we had a great conversation, a lot of fun. And so, Chuck, let's hear about your personal history, where you're from, and some of the details along the way, and how you got into boating.
Sure. So I grew up in Texas. Mostly, my dad was a college professor, and so I mostly grew up around Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. And he had been a Sea Scout as a kid, and had books, Sea Scout manuals from back in, I guess, the 30s, and which I devoured as a kid. I just thought that was great because there we were inland, and so I had dreams of sailing and so forth that had to be postponed until I was probably about 30 when I built my first boat. Actually, I bought a sailboat and learned how to sail, kind of taught myself how to sail, and then I started building boats, and I guess I've built an average of about a boat a year for the last close to 30 years. So I've managed to, and then along the way we managed to turn that hobby into a business of sorts. We live now out in the Texas Hill Country, which is a pretty remote area, not near any chandleries at all. So it's always been hard for us to get boat building hardware and supplies out here. So it just kind of, everything kind of morphed into this business, Duckworks. It started out as a magazine. When the internet first came along, I thought, well, maybe we could do a website, and that'd be kind of a fun thing to do. We always had computers. I was lucky growing up in a university town to be exposed to computers actually in high school back in the 60s, and did a little programming back then, so I've always kind of been familiar with computers. So we started the website, which we thought would be a business based on magazine, on publishing. But what we found out, that a lot of people found out, is that internet publishing is not really a very good way to make a living, because what happened is the advertising space way outstripped the demand for advertising, and so online advertising goes really, really cheap. So that didn't work out so well, and somebody suggested, well, maybe you should sell some boat building supplies on your website. So we started doing that, and about 12 years ago, I guess, never looked back. And today we have some 3,000 line items, and we have a couple of employees, and it's a nice little mom-and-pop business for us.
Very cool. So, Chuck, let's back up a little bit here. So when you were a kid, your dad had some Sea Scout manuals laying around.
Uh-huh.
So was he a Sea Scout himself?
Was he? Yes, he was.
Okay. So, I just found out about the Sea Scouts about a year ago. I interviewed some guys that run a Sea Scout program. For those that don't know what that is, could you tell us briefly what Sea Scouts are, Chuck?
I'll tell you as much as I know about it, because I never was one. It's the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts of America have 3 different levels, which I was in all those 3 different levels. One is the Cub Scouts, and that's for kids 8 through about 11, I think. And then from 12 to, I want to say, 16 is the Boy Scouts. And then from 16 to 18, there's several different kind of organizations. There's the Sea Scouts. There's also the Explorers, which is what I was, which is more of a land-oriented, just kind of an extension of the Boy Scouts. And I think there may be like an Air Scouts or something. I'm not sure. But the Sea Scouts is for boys 16 to 18 or 15 to 18. And it's just more advanced programs like the Boy Scouts, but just a little bit older kids.
And I think they recently celebrated their 100th anniversary, if I remember correctly.
The Sea Scouts or the Boy Scouts?
The Sea Scouts.
Oh, is that right? I did not know that.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe last year was their 100th year, somewhere around there. So they've been around a long time. So did you do any boating as a kid, Chuck?
I didn't. With one exception. When I was probably 13 or 14, my father actually built a boat. He got a catalog from the Luger Company, which some people may remember those people. They sell boat kits, and quite a few different ones. And I had my eye on a nice little sailboat in that thing. And of course, he, being a fisherman, had no use for a sailboat. He wanted a motorboat. So and since it was his money,
yeah.
So he built a 22-foot cabin cruiser in the garage, in the family garage, and I got exposed to boat building then. So a lot of people are afraid of boat building. They think, well, that's all done by professional people or skilled artisans or in factories or whatever. But so I guess I was lucky because I was exposed to that at an early age. So building a boat was no big deal for me. But that boat I did get to use quite a bit, and we used to take it down to the Gulf of Mexico. Then after it was built, and for several years thereafter, and we would take that. My dad and I, and sometimes a friend of mine or my brother, would go down and we would go out and fish and stay overnight in the boat. And that sleeping overnight on a boat was just it for me. I was in heaven.
So that was a 22-foot cabin cruiser?
Little cabin cruiser, yeah.
Yeah, and so was that a plywood boat, Chuck?
It was.
Uh-huh.
It was a plywood boat and fiberglass on the outside.
And what construction method was it on the inside?
It was the old style. You know, it's interesting about the evolution of boat construction methods. It was a long time before builders really knew what to do with plywood. Plywood's a fairly recent invention. Probably came around during the, just in the 30s, I think, or 40s. And what builders would do is take plywood and put it over these oak frames. And this boat my dad built had oak frames and stringers and carlins and all that, and then plywood over that.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a pretty heavy boat. But now we don't do that now.
Right.
Typically.
Yeah.
Much lighter and actually stronger probably because of their lightness.
Right.
With other techniques, which I guess we're going to talk about later.
Right. So, Chuck, where is that boat these days? Is it still around?
I have no idea. No,
okay.
He sold it.
Oh, did he?
Sold it. I was about the time I went off to college, I guess, and I haven't seen it in years.
So, what year did you build your first boat, Chuck?
Oh, let's see. It was shortly after we moved here from Montana. I'm going to say in the mid-'80s probably.
And what kind of boat did you build?
I built 2 little prams because we had kids that were getting old enough, and I thought, well, they would enjoy learning how to sail. So I built 2 little from Clark Craft. I got plans and built 2 little 8-foot plywood prams.
And they had sail rigs on them?
Yep, had little sprit sails on them, and great little boats, fun little boats to dink around in.
And so those were also plywood boats, Chuck?
Yep, plywood boats, 1/4-inch plywood. Then my next boat was a 30-foot power boat.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty.
Oh, man,
right
Chuck. Tell me about that boat.
Well, it was a Bolger, Tennessee. And Tennessee is one of Bolger's state boats. In this particular case, it's 30 feet long, well, 29 feet long and 6 feet wide, and it's probably 4 feet high. It has a 9.9 outboard motor on it, and it will do 14 honest miles per hour with that motor. It's the craziest thing you ever saw.
Oh my goodness!
And the motor was a 4-stroke, and so at a cruising speed of about 8 or 9 knots, you can actually get we would actually get 15 miles per gallon on that boat, which is for a 30-foot boat is pretty remarkable too.
Really?
Yeah, but the reason I built a power boat was because I had a son at that time who wanted to. I said, "Let's build a boat." And he said, "Okay, let's build a boat." And I said, he's a fisherman like my dad, and so he wanted a power boat. And I figured, what the heck? As long as it's big enough, we can spend the night on it. I'll be happy. So it was a fun boat. We ran that boat. Sandra and I cruised in that boat. My son too, up and down the Gulf Coast, all the way from Brownsville clear up to Palacios, I guess, halfway up the coast.
Wow, so that was a long, narrow boat. Was it a flat bottom or V bottom or?
Flat bottom.
Really?
Perfect.
Wow, so it had a nice cabin on it with some berths and so on?
No, it had a tiny little cabin. It was only 8 feet high. Not 8 feet. It was only 4 feet high. It was really just a cuddy. That's what it was. And we just put an air mattress on the floor and slept like that. It never built any furniture on it. Had a huge cockpit, 8 feet long and 6 feet wide. And it had a steering wheel, so the helm was way up in the cockpit, about amidships, which being 15 feet from that little 10-horse four-stroke motor meant you could, even at full throttle, you could carry on an ordinary conversation in the cockpit because you're so far from the motor and it being so little anyway. And then it had a bunch of lazarettes and storage stuff going back, but a pretty interesting little camp cruiser.
Yeah. So that was called a Bulger, Tennessee?
Tennessee, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, you can find pictures of it online. Yeah. Pictures of different ones.
Yeah. So tell me about some of the other boats you've built over the years, Chuck.
Wow. Probably the most complicated boat I ever built was not complicated, but the biggest boat, and it was only 25 feet long, but it was actually a bigger, heavier boat than the Tennessee. The Tennessee was kind of a splinter. I built Jim McCallick's, I'm going to have to think about it, his Caprice design, which is a cat catch, water ballasted, multi-chine hull, lee board, so that the cabin, in spite of the small size of the boat, the cabin's just huge inside. It's got a galley, a separate galley, and a more or less stateroom. Although you can't stand up in the cabin, but you can sit up in it. Has similarly a big cockpit, big balance lug, 200 square foot balance lug mainsail, and a mizzen, which is handy for a cruiser. I thought it was the perfect cruising boat for our area, for this skinny water that we have along the Gulf Coast. And I still think it was. We sailed that boat a lot over the years. I sailed it on the Texas 200 the first four or 5 years of that, and it was really, really a great boat. I think I wrote something for a Small Craft Advisor about that boat.
Interesting. Do you still have that boat, Chuck?
I don't. I sold it a couple of years ago, just running out of space. I had at the time I had 10 or 12 boats, and I wasn't really using it but once a year. And then I built a John Welsford walkabout and took that to the Texas 200, which meant the Caprice wasn't even going to be used for that. So I sold it to a couple who they sailed it on the Texas 200 instead of me. So.
Oh wow, wow. So what boats do you currently have, Chuck?
I just got a set of plans for another Jim McCallick boat that I think I'm going to build next, and it's called a Tune 19, which is a 19-foot another cat catch. Probably my favorite rig. That's what the Walkabout had too. Right now we've got a whole bunch of canoes and kayaks and a little John boat. And I actually bought a boat. First boat I bought in a long time. I bought a Skiff America 20. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's another little cruising power boat. It has a little walk-through cabin. It's 20 feet long, has a 25-horse four-stroke Yamaha Bigfoot motor on it. And I'd always admired those boats and wished I had another power boat to use down the coast. And this thing came up for sale. And in fact, we have a classified section in our magazine website, and the guy called me up and said, "Yeah, I want to list this on your classified for sale." I said, "Well, I'm not going to list it. I'm gonna buy it." And it was too good a deal to pass up.
Really?
So I've got that now, plus all the other boats, and now I'm fixing to build another boat. So.
So you got plenty of boats down there.
It's a sickness, I'll tell you.
So how far do you have to go to get to water to use your boats?
You know, half-hour away, there's a little impoundment on a river, which is not really big enough to do any sailing, but enough to put a boat in the water if it's not too big. It's a kayak or a canoe is fine. We have to go about 2 hours to get to a lake that's more than 300 feet wide. There's several lakes around here that are big size lakes, and then the coast. But I really prefer to do my boating at the coast, which is about 4 hours away for us. So when we go down there, we stay for a while as a rule.
Do you go along the intercoastal waterway down there?
Yeah. The route for the Texas 200 sort of follows the intracoastal waterway, and that's where the deep water is. And any boats that are very deep pretty much have to stick to that. But there's a lot of water down there that's available. A lot of what we call skinny water. That's available for boats that don't draw very much, and there's a lot to explore down there, a lot of wild and rugged country. The whole section of the Gulf Coast has the National Seashore on the Barrier Island on one side and the King Ranch on the other side. So it's between the cattle and the alligators and the coyotes. It's some pretty wide open country down there.
Wow.
It's not scenic or spectacular. You don't have mountains and trees and fjords and kind of things like you have up in the Northwest. But on the other hand, the water's warm and there's a lot of wildlife to see. Lots and lots of birds.
Wow. And you see a lot of alligators down there, Chuck?
Yeah, not a lot. There's plenty. They tend to be reclusive, but they're there. You definitely have them.
That would keep me out of the water right there.
Yeah, they don't like the salt water so much. They like the brackish water.
Okay.
See them sticking to the ponds, like on the island or on the mainland. They'll be around in ponds where the water's kind of brackish, or the tidal creeks. I'm worried more about the stingrays, jellyfish, and rattlesnakes myself.
Interesting. So do you get in the water and swim down there some?
I don't.
No.
I don't.
Yeah.
Some people do. I don't know. And you can. It's not really inviting. It's for the most part, it tends to be kind of cloudy because we have a lot of rivers that empty into the bay system. So the water is not really inviting in that way. Plus, there's lots of little stingy things in there. Jellyfish and stingrays and sharks.
Yeah. So, Chuck, I'm just curious about your canoes and kayaks. Are they stitch and glue boats? Any skin on frame? What are they?
I built a couple skin on frame boats. I built one lap straight canoe. I built all the rest are stitch and glue. I did build one foam core with Kevlar, but it's a multi-chine boat. The design was for stitch and glue, but I wanted to make it. I just wanted to try it, and came out with a nice light. It's a decked, what you call a decked canoe, and so I built it with the regular boat building foam, not just not styrofoam, but regular. I don't know if it's Corcel or what. I don't know what brand it is because I got it in the trade for some other stuff, and it's got lined with Kevlar inside and it's fiberglass outside, which I was told was that the Kevlar would be more useful on the inside to prevent punctures. So we've taken that boat on some trips down the Rio Grande River, which can get real shallow and rocky in places, and it's taken quite a beating and survived very well.
So the hull itself is foam, Chuck?
Yes, I took panels of this boat building foam, 3/8 inch panels on the bottom and 1/4 inch on the decking, and then lined the whole thing with lined the inside with Kevlar and fiberglass the outside, just like any other boat.
Oh, interesting.
And I built several more or less the same method, but using plywood, using regular marine plywood.
Yeah.
But those come out a little heavier.
So the foam's a little lighter to do it that way, huh?
Yep. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So what's your preferred plywood these days for building, Chuck?
I will. This boat that I'm fixing to build, I'm probably going to build it cheap. So which means I probably won't use marine plywood. But here in the South, we have yellow pine and plywood, which is pretty good. It's exterior glue, and I've used it quite a bit. It does not delaminate. It's heavy, but for some parts of small boats, it can be used. It's much, much cheaper than marine plywood. However, all that said, probably the last half dozen boats I've built have used marine plywood, and we have a grade of Marante plywood available around here called Aquatech plywood, and then I've also used quite a bit of HOWB Okume.
Okay.
In the 4mm.
Now the Marante's a little heavier than Okume, is that right? But it's less expensive?
A little heavier. Yep, it's a little heavier, but it's also a little stronger, and it's a little more rot resistant. So, you got those trade-offs. Okume is not real rot resistant.
Right.
But it is light. So, it just depends on the part of the boat you're building and where you're going to, what you're going to do with it. For boats that aren't, boats that aren't kept in the water, like kayaks, obviously, and canoes, and most small trailer sailors, rot's really not that much of an issue as long as you can keep water out of them in between uses, and that's real critical. They can last a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
Keep them dry in between uses, and make sure there's no, enclosed or flotation areas that you can't open up and dry out.
Now, is a Marante a little cheaper than Okume?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of thought so. Now, do you sell the plywood too, Chuck?
No, we do not sell any plywood or lumber.
Okay.
It's a whole different deal. It's hard to ship, and almost all of our orders are shipped by U.S. Postal Service by priority mail, and so we can't get a sheet of plywood into a priority mail box very well. So.
Yeah. So Chuck, give us a rundown about your store, your business, what you sell, and if people want more information about that,
Sure.
How they would access that.
We started out with two things basically. In fact, it was Jim McCallick, who's a small boat designer, who suggested that we sell. That we sell online, and he suggested sailcloth. He said sailcloth is something that's hard for just amateur builders to get, and it's not. I forget how he presented it to us, but we said, well, okay. So we bought a roll of it, and we sold that. And we also, at the same time, started selling his plans online, and then pretty soon, shortly after that, we got an account with Sea Dog up there in Washington, and they sell. They're wholesalers of all kinds of hardware, from cleats to shackles. Not any sailboat stuff though. Mostly powerboat stuff. Cleats and shackles and thimbles and all those kinds of things. So we have extensive selection of that sea dog stuff. We've added to the sailcloth. We have grommets and grommet tools and turn buttons and thread and seam stick tape, things for making your own sails, for people who want to make their sails. And then we got hooked up with another little mom and pop business called Race Light up in Ohio, and they make all kinds of blocks, and these are made in the USA, and they're very competitive and very high quality, competitive price-wise, very high quality. So it's all kinds of blocks and pulleys and some cleats, cam cleats, and those sort of things. And later on, we got an association with another company to do epoxy and fiberglass, and that's all drop shipped out of a warehouse in Florida for us. But we handle all the customer relations. So in other words, we guarantee that and watch the shipments, make sure they get where they're going, and that sort of thing. So,
what brand of epoxy is that, Chuck?
We offer both System 3 and very, very soon West System and an economy epoxy called marine epoxy, which is what I use myself most of the time because it's just about as good as any other standard boat building epoxy that I've ever found. It's a 2-to-1, 100% solids epoxy. I've never had it blush. I've used it for a long time.
And that's quite a bit less expensive.
Quite a bit less, yeah. It's pretty competitive with just about anything you can find. You can find some others online that are maybe a couple dollars less, but not a lot.
So, Chuck, what would a gallon of that cost, combined resin and hardener, approximately?
Yeah, since it's a 2-to-1 mix, you typically get a gallon and a half kit.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So a gallon and a half of that would be $96.75 plus shipping, as opposed to the premium System 3, which would be $150.80.
Wow, that's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, so it's 2/3 the price. So,
what are the disadvantages, if any, of using the less expensive brand, Chuck?
Let me, instead of answering it that way, let me tell you what the advantages are of the premium brand.
Okay.
Okay, so the System 3 Silvertip resin is really, really good stuff, and it's not good in the end. The end product is, for our purposes, is the same. It's strong. You can sand it. You can fair it. It's waterproof and chemical proof, all that stuff. But where the System 3 Silvertip has its advantages in the use is in the application, because what it will do is it'll give you longer pot life, longer working time, and a faster cure. So, in other words, let's say you're doing two things side by side, and you get the right speed so they have about the same pot life, and you can use a slower hardener for the cheaper resin and get a longer pot life. And so they both start getting too hard to use at the same time. So let's say you've done your layup and everything. Now what's going to happen is that premium epoxy is going to be ready to sand much, much faster, probably twice as fast as the other resin. The other resin is going to get tacky, and then it's going to be soft, and if you've ever tried to sand resin that's not fully cured, it gums up your sandpaper, and it's just not something you can do. You have to wait till it gets to a certain point. So that's the advantage of the Silvertip.
I
so I
see.
tell people, if your time is valuable, you want to be able to do, say, 2 layups in a day. You want to go out in the morning, layups and stuff, have it, and then be able to sand it and do another layup on top of it that same day. You probably want the premium stuff.
Now, System 3 has their standard stuff, and then the silver tip is their top of the line. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So their standard epoxy, it wouldn't cure the same way that the silver tip would.
No, it cures more like the economy stuff.
I see.
And it's comparable. I've used them side by side, and I really can't tell the difference.
And the silver tip for a gallon and a half of that, is that 150 or is it more than that?
That's what I've got. It. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm looking at I'm showing 150 for the standard resin.
Because the silver tip's more expensive, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought so. Let me look here just a second. I guess we can't. Just a second.
Oh, we can come back to that. And then you're going to be getting West Systems here pretty soon too, it sounds like.
Yeah, we've got our supplier that supplies us with stuff has just taken on West, and so we're going to be
very good.
Wow. Yeah, the standard System 3 is actually priced higher than the System 3 silver tip.
Really?
So and I've heard that System 3 is trying to phase out their standard resin.
I see.
So,
yeah. Maybe that's the deal then, huh?
Yep.
Okay, very good. And so if people want to order supplies or get more information, what's your website, Chuck? Is that the best way to do it?
The best way to find us probably is to go to Google or Bing or some search engine and just type Duckworks. It's DUCKWORKS, and it will present you with us, and you'll see our magazine, Duckworks Magazine, and Duckworks Boatbuilder Supply will both come up pretty much right on top, and you can actually get to either one from the other one. So just Duckworks is what you need to know, and you can actually go to your browser window and type in Duckworks, but it's not duckworks.com. Actually, believe it or not, when we first started Duckworks in 2000, when we first set up the website, no, it was 1999, the domain name duckworks.com was already taken. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know there was any, I thought it was a made-up word that nobody would. My wife made up the term. She said, we need a name for our business that's easy to spell, it's kind of cute, and people will tend to remember it. And so she just came up with that out of the blue. And the domain name was already taken way back in 1999. I was shocked.
Wow, isn't that something?
Yep.
Pretty crazy.
So we couldn't get the domain name. But
now, do you guys take phone orders too, Chuck?
Absolutely, yes.
And what's the phone number there?
I can give you that. Just a second. You'd think I would know it right off the
Well, you don't call yourself probably, though, right?
Yeah. You know it. 830-864-5799.
Okay, very good.
We also have a fax machine at 4197.
Okay.
Same first 6 numbers.
Okay, Chuck. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast today, and we're going to call it good with this, and then we're going to do another recording after this for a separate podcast on tack and tape boat building. But anyway, thanks for being on the podcast today. Any parting comments?
Wow. Listen, Dan, I really appreciate this. It's an honor to be on your show. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. I've really enjoyed them, and I would recommend anybody go back in the library and just what I do is I put them on a thumb drive, and I've got my radio in my car has a thumb drive slot, and I just plug it in there and listen to those podcasts as I'm driving. It's great.
Cool.
Great stuff.
All right.
I really appreciate you inviting me on.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Chuck.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. All right. Bye-bye. Thanks, Chuck, for doing that interview. It was really fun to connect. Really glad I got to meet you in person in September when you were out here at the festival. And I wish you and Sandra the best in your business there. And sorry about your addiction. It sounds like yours is worse than mine. There's probably no hope for you, Chuck, and not much for me, but keep building the boat a year or so and have fun with it. And wow, you've done some amazing boats. That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So anyway, best to you. Well, if you'd like to connect with me, you can shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest if you look for Wooden Boat Dan there, and on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel with about a dozen videos up there, just fun amateur videos about the wooden boat space, so check that out. youtube.com/woodenboatdan. I'd love to hear from you. If you have some voicemail feedback you'd like to leave about the podcast and tell me how you enjoy it, or you have questions or comments, you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/voicemail and leave up to a 90-second message there from your computer or your smartphone. I love to get those. It's a lot of fun. Well, I'm getting ready to run off to my day job here. I'm sitting in my slacks and my dress shirt, and I'm going to go sit behind a computer for the day. So if you're out working in your shop or you're outdoors mountain biking or hiking, or you're out paddling your boat or rowing your boat or motoring your boat, I'm a little jealous because I will be inside all day today. Anyway, have a great day. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan over and out. God bless. Have a great week, and we will talk again next week. Take care.